everyone, and welcome to Hit and Hustle from IrishSportsDaily.com. I'm your host, Greg Flammang, and with me, as always, is Jamie Uyeyama, Mr. Jamie University. It is Thursday, March 13th, and we are going to be talking Notre Dame recruiting. You know, Jamie, we don't usually talk recruiting on this show. It's more about the football team and trends on the football team. But sometimes you got to go where the people are, and I think it's top of mind for everyone right now on the recruiting front, and, you know, Notre Dame's again kind of a lull on the recruiting front lately over the last, couple months here. And that's kind of coupled by the fact that USC and Chad Bowden is making it his business to troll Notre Dame at every turn. That continues to be a weird thing to me, but I think that has people kind of on edge. It's like, hey, when is Notre Dame going to do some stuff on the recruiting front? So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about why Notre Dame is where they are, what it means. I think that people are very antsy specifically about wide receiver. I think there's usually a coach that is kind of the whipping boy for fans. It's kind of like every year. Right now it's Mike Brown. And so we're going to talk about that. We'll talk about wide receiver. We'll talk about what recruiting needs to be overall for Notre Dame. I think what recruiting success looks like for Notre Dame is a little bit different than other teams in terms of positions. So we can talk about that. And, it's going to be basically a recruiting-centric show. So thank everyone for tuning in. If you like what you hear today, please hit that like button. Please hit subscribe. Please hit the notification bell. See whatever it is. We are going live. Links to the podcast are in the description below. And as always, the show is brought to you by ESQ Clothing, founded by Notre Dame alum Ge Wang. You've seen ESQ and all your favorite Notre Dame players and coaches. With over a decade of making the best custom clothing available, ESQ will help you look and feel your best in 2025, from a perfect fitting suit or sport coat, shirt, or bomber jacket, or a perfect tuxedo for wedding season. Check out Ge's amazing work at esqclothing.com. Book an appointment to upgrade your wardrobe today. Mention ISD to get 10% off your entire purchase. You good, Jamie? You good? Oh, you're muted now. You muted yourself.
My wife is on the way back from something, and now my son just popped in. Whatever, making a cameo.
As kids
here,
do.
so,
As kids do. My children have made cameos before, as many people know. The show goes on. It's all good. So, all right. Before we get to recruiting, I do want to talk a little bit about the upcoming quarterback battle. Jamie, I think we're in for an interesting spring. Every once in a while, I get to the point where I'll think to myself, I don't know if Twitter's for me. I don't know if I'm meant to be on social media. And that happened to me today. Listen, I posted a video yesterday of Steve Angeli throwing a fade ball, a back shoulder fade ball to Deion Colzie against Florida State. Caught the pass, scored a touchdown. I said, this is a nice throw. It's a good throw. It's across the field. It's a field throw. It's not a boundary throw. It's a field throw. Back shoulder. Deion Colzie able to use his body. And someone replied, like, why isn't he, like, he throws a good ball. Why isn't he the favorite to win the quarterback job? And I pointed out, well, I think it's probably because he takes a lot of sacks. Like, he does. He has a high sack rate. And I said, if he was pressured the same amount of times as Ryan Leonard last year, he'd have been sacked 47 times. Now, obviously, that's a projection, right? It's just an illustration. He takes a lot of sacks, right? And people got very upset at this. They're acting like I was standing for CJ Carr, standing for Kenny Minchey, didn't want Steve Angeli to win the quarterback job. It's not what I was saying at all. It's just a simple fact that if you have a weakness and you're entered in a quarterback battle and you display that weakness in a quarterback battle, that might be a reason why you don't win the quarterback battle. That's all I was saying. People didn't handle that very well. And so that's Twitter for you, and that's social media for you. But anything on that, Jamie, just kind of like, hey, if any of these quarterbacks was perfect or was without flaw, then there wouldn't be much of a quarterback battle. But it is. They all have questions. They all have things that they have to overcome. They all have strengths, right? That's why it's going to be interesting. Anything on that before we get to
well, the thing is too, is it's just like people can pick apart Riley Leonard, and they did. Yeah,
Right.
there are things that are going to be there. It's not going to be. I mean, that is one of the things. If you look at we have to look at it when we're analyzing everything, and everyone has to look at it as this is why this person might win the job. This is also why the person might not win the job. And I would say like it's the sample size of actual games of like snaps that Steve Angeli has played has mattered. It's small. It's small, right? Like so, it's like not one of these things where you can really judge everything based on that. Like he's had a lot less game reps than someone else, but it is red flaggy, that part of it, which in that small sample size, it's been something that stood out. It's been something that stood out, and there's nothing wrong with pointing it out. There's nothing wrong with also like, but I think everyone needs to chill and just let it play out, because it's like one of these things where everyone always gets ahead of themselves. And like, here's a perfect example. There's someone who is a very there's someone who works in the media right now that they have like a at the time, 5 years or 6 years ago, or whatever the heck it was, when they were, I was having a Twitter exchange with them. They were convinced that Malik Zaire was so much better than Deshaun Kaiser and should have been the quarterback. And honestly, now I think if you saw these kind of tweets from that person now, you'd be like, oh my God, this person's an idiot. Like you wouldn't take them seriously, which is why I'm not naming them, because I don't think it's whatever. It was a very like fan, whatever. They weren't informed of what all the kind of stuff. And I actually had a separate kind of like offline conversation with them. I was like, okay, this was kind of a little bit more of whatever. And it was fine. But that just goes to show, dude, someone who I think is like, now I would consider like a pretty informed, smart football person in the media, can have way too much strong takes out of like things that aren't like you don't know enough about, or you don't like that it's just very polarizing when it comes to like a quarterback, of just like this thing or that thing could have been like the difference that makes people get riled up. And no matter what happens, there's going to be people whoever wins a job, there's going to be Angeli people. There's going to be Card people. There's going to be Minchie people. That's kind of how it is. Like, I already get it in my mentions when it has nothing to do with anything that I'm dreaming about. They're like, man, I can't wait to see Kenny Minchie. Right? I can't like, I mean, why don't they just say Carr's going to win the job? Or like, I really think Angeli should be that. People already have an idea of what they think will happen. And no matter how it plays out, whoever wins the job, there's not going to be blind trust of like anyone. People are going to question it, just like how they question like taking Sam Hartman or taking Riley Leonard or Jack Cohn for that matter, right? And whatever it is, Jack Cohn's a perfect example of like, he had deficiencies. You have to manage around those deficiencies and manage around the deficiencies of the line and stuff at that time. They adjusted, and then all of a sudden he was like lighting it up and was like playing at a completely different level. Well, because they coached to his strengths and they were doing it. So one of the things with Steve Angeli, when he threw for 80% in the Oregon State, the bowl game, the Sun Bowl, well, it was very strategic of how they approached that game, because they had like 2 tackles who were starting for the first time. Like, they had a lot of stuff going on there that it was like if they tried to call it exactly how they called it for Sam Hartman, it probably would have gone bad for Steve Angeli. It would have gone bad for Notre Dame in the game. So whoever wins the job, Mike Denbrock, just like he did with Riley Leonard, has to adjust to that person's strengths and weaknesses and do all that and take all of that into account. And it's about whose has the most strengths that can kind of accentuate the best parts of Notre Dame's offense. And ultimately, like, that is something that you just don't know until it's actually going to happen.
Yeah. And like, I was actually watching, and the reason I posted that throw of Angeli, mostly I wanted to highlight how everyone reacted to Colsey scoring a touchdown, because I thought it was cool. I was watching like tape. I was watching Angeli's, throws and everything. And look, there's a lot of good stuff that he does. I mean, there's a reason that he's the number 2, right? There's a reason that he threw for 80% in the Sun Bowl against Oregon State, right? And he's a good quarterback. And and the funny thing is like in 2022, the first time I ever went to a game and watched the pregame stuff and everything from the press box, is like I do my running diary, and I commented on that, and I was like, it's just warm-ups, but like, man, I really like how Steve Angeli throws the ball, and I said it in the USC game too. I went to that game after. I was like, man, he spins it really good. Like, the ball comes out of his hand really nicely. And at the time, people were like, it's just warm-ups. Why do you care? And it's like, well, because like that stuff sort of translates to games, right? And that's why I pointed it out. And so like I'm watching the tape and I see a lot of good stuff. And then in every game, it's just like, you shouldn't be taking that sack. You can't. That ball's got to get out, or you got to get away from this rush, or you can't just stand there while they're closing in on you. There's no need for you to take a sack in that situation. I'm thinking this. And I'm thinking I could put this on a video and put it out there, but I was like, people can't handle it. I'm literally not doing it.
They really can't. Yeah.
They can't handle it. They can't look at something and say like, oh, that's interesting. I wonder how that'll play out as they go through the competition. Right. And I wish it would be different. Like, but I don't feel like dealing with the grief, like in the Sun Bowl, he was pressured 4 times. Total in the game, 4 pressures, which is like exceptional pass blocking. See, a lot of people like say things like the blocking will be better, right? He was hardly pressured at all in the Sun Bowl. He was pressured 4 times total in a game. He was sacked twice, and neither of those sacks needed to be taken, right?
Yeah.
It's just like, that's just a thing that he needs to get better at, right? And if he doesn't win the job, and the reason why he's not,
and quarterbacks, that's something people get better at. That is something.
Right, for sure. And it makes sense that he's not as good at it because he came from Bergen Catholic, where it's like they run the ball all the time, and B, their O-line is unbelievable. Right? Like, so like he's not dealing with pressure the same way someone like CJ Carr was when he was at his school, when they weren't as good. Right? Like, it's just a reps thing. I'm not saying he can't get better at it. I'm not rooting against him. I'm not rooting for anybody. Except for the fact that like I'm really intrigued by Kenny Minchey, but that's just a personal thing. If Steve Angeli is the quarterback, then he's the quarterback. I'm fine with it. I really have no problem. Just pointing out like, hey, there's stuff that he needs to get better at. And the reason that he's probably not the favorite is because he takes a lot of sacks. If he was throwing a lot of picks in limited reps, we'd point it out. We'd say, hey, he throws the ball to the other team. That's a lot. That's not good. Right. So it's just, that's fine. It is what it is. We'll move on. Let's talk recruiting, Jamie. A lot of people are upset. Notre Dame is sitting, and I'm using 247's composite because I don't feel like going over to On3 and doing their thing. So I always look at the composite for the team rankings, right? Notre Dame sits at 10 right now. They have 7 commitments, which isn't that many. The last commitment they got was, I think it was Tyler Merrill. Yes, it was. It was Tyler Merrill on January 30th of this year, right? 4-star offensive lineman. They don't have any 5 stars right now. The highest rated player by composite is Thomas Davis Jr., who committed in late November. Obviously, he's not a legacy, but he's the son of the linebacker Thomas Davis, who went to Georgia. There hasn't been a lot of movement on the recruiting front, which kind of makes sense because Chad Bowden is now at USC. He was the recruiting coordinator at Notre Dame. He held the GM position, but really he was the recruiting guy. They put so much on him in terms of recruiting and everything. He's now at USC. And so that whole operation has kind of been in flux since then, right? People are getting antsy, as is understandable, right? It is that time of year when you want to start bringing in commitments. And as people are especially concerned about wide receiver, right? They have Dylan Faison, who the brother of Jordan Faison, who Matt Freeman's had a lot of positive things to say about him on the board this week. But he committed almost a year ago to the day. He committed.
Yeah, he was
March 18th, 2024.
Yeah, right after the pot of gold.
Right after the pot of gold. So it's been a bit since Notre Dame's gotten a wide receiver commitment. Talk about what the problems have been. And by the way, you flagged this a long time ago. Like maybe I'll say during the last season sometime. October, November, whatever it was. Maybe it was December when we were doing the kind of the signing day stuff. You talked about this a long time ago about how, hey, Notre Dame is not getting guys on campus for the next recruiting cycle. And now we're kind of seeing that bear fruit a little bit. Talk about that and talk about where Notre Dame needs to go at the wide receiver position.
Yeah, I think, primarily I would say, specifically at wide receiver, that like definitely stood out. Like they weren't, I looked at what they had at the camps, and one of the things that they've done at the camps, they've used the camps to help. It's been a huge part of their evaluation process is landing these guys who work out for them in person. They get verified measurements on them. They get verified testing.
Yeah.
They coach them in camps, and then, they get them. And then one of the things that they didn't do, like, is there just weren't a lot of guys, and they've always done it kind of where it goes like, okay, it's 2023. Well, they have a bunch of guys in the 2025 class that are there working out, trying to earn offers, or guys with offers that they're trying to see how much they want to, invest in and all that kind of stuff. Right. And they just didn't have that same number at the camps kind of going in. Definitely not a receiver. And they didn't have guys who worked out there at receiver that emerged that they liked enough to say, hey, we're going to give this guy an offer. Because that happens all the time too, right? Guys that you like and that didn't happen for them.
Yeah.
It happened for them at other positions, didn't happen from receiver. And then you just looked at, okay, well, let's see what happens like during the season in terms of like who they're getting to visiting. Obviously they got like the grill and chill. They got all these kind of things that leading up to it. They just didn't have enough guys. Like the board was too small. Like, yes, they offered enough guys, but they weren't getting guys on campus. And we can also, yes, some of the blame, yes, for sure. It is going to go on the position coach, of course, right?
It's his responsibility.
Of course, that is going to be, it's just like the same thing. I wrote about it in 6 Thoughts. Wins and losses on the field, the first guy, no matter, even if it's like not maybe directly his fault or whatever kind of thing, whatever, it's going to be the guy at the top first. Yeah. So when you're looking at the guy at the top, when we're looking at position recruiting, is that position coach. So that is what's going to happen. But obviously part of it, the blame goes to the Bowden and the recruiting staff as well, because they weren't getting these guys. They weren't like, if those guys are playing such a big part of it and they want to take credit for the other guys.
You can't be both. I am responsible for building Notre Dame's championship run and the roster, and I want all of that credit. And oh, by the way, last summer we didn't get any wide receivers on campus to visit games. Like that you are also responsible for that as well. Like you got to carry that mantle also.
100%, right? So that's what I think, but ultimately it doesn't matter because the guys that would be blaming for it, they're not even there anymore.
Right. So it's kind of irrelevant now.
So it's kind of irrelevant. It's kind of irrelevant, but I think you're looking at that kind of thing where I who knows what was going on in Chad Bowden's head for a long time, but I'm guessing that he had his one foot out the door for quite a while. Like he was obviously he was looking at Michigan the year before. So I think he was always just looking to leverage that. That's what a lot of guys do, is like they either look to leave or they're looking to leverage and get more money, which, hey, a lot of people do that in life. That's what it is. So I don't know if that had how much of an impact it had on, what his recruiting, what he was doing with Notre Dame, but it has been all you just look at. There weren't like set up well for like someone to just step in and take over how that was. So, and obviously that's not what Mike Martin, the new general manager, that's not his job. He's not going to have the same responsibilities, even though the same title as Chad Bowden. He doesn't have the same responsibilities. He's much more in evaluation and those pieces of it.
Yeah.
He's not going to have that same recruiting responsibilities. And then if they're still kind of filling out like parts of that recruiting staff. So, and they've had people just like any kind of thing. You're just going to be stretched when you have like 4 people leave, right? In your recruiting department leave. You're going to be stretched because you're not going to hire those people right away anyways, right? Like it's going to take time to hire that because they have all these things. So I think there's a little bit of like things that kind of like compounded all the situations of them obviously going deeper into the playoff. And fair enough, they should have been focusing on that and winning, and the coaches definitely, right? Like they don't need to be calling 2026 recruits during that time. Like they need to be like, we got to win this game. Like, and which is why like the recruiting staff has to like kind of like take on more of a burden during that time and all that. So maybe that's something to do with it, but it's kind of gone back to before, where if you're looking at like kind of like how it kind of was planned out, because you're always kind of like recruiting a cycle ahead.
Yeah.
And really like I bet if you look at like say like the pot of gold guys that they went to last year, which is like, it's a cool idea. Hey, great. You own St. Patrick's Day. Great. Right. Irish, all that. But how many of those guys that you made a thing did you actually make an impact with in terms of like, hey, from this point on, the relationships built to that point. And it's harder to do when Notre Dame obviously had a ton of success. So people think, wow, you go 14-2, it's going to automatically translate into success. I mean, you get somewhat of a boost, but still, if everybody else is developing relationships on a much longer period of time, and you're worried about like, hey, we got to win to keep our jobs, because it was like they were like hot seat to that point. So for a lot of that time, right? Like especially after the NIU game. So there's just things that kind of like I think ultimately led to where they're at now, and also I wouldn't expect, this isn't usually you mentioned of the last commit, end of January to March. This is usually a dead time for Notre Dame recruiting. But I think what you're looking at is normally what they did is they would have 7 commitments in the fall for 2026. And then all of a sudden they have like their junior days in January and whatever. And then they're getting like 3 more then. And then they got double digits. And then you're kind of like, okay, well then we're kind of building up to like 15 or something in the spring. And now it's like they're just behind that what they were because of like all of the other pieces like kind of stacking on top of each other to make it where it is. And it's going to be fine in a lot of areas where I don't think like people need to chill in certain aspects, but I mean, wide receiver recruiting, it can flip quickly, but right now, it's certainly not trending in a good way. And that's totally fair. It's totally fair to be like, hey, Mike Brown, offensive staff, recruiting staff, Marcus Freeman, everybody, like, this is an issue. It's an issue. And that's just where it is. Like, they don't, if ISD, we had a thing, it was like kind of like breaking down, like, who are the priorities for them at receiver.
Yeah.
I can't remember. It was like in December or January, whatever, right? When Christian and Matt put that together and did this big piece. Well, the guys that they listed are all just committed to other schools. So it's like, other than Caden Finley, right? Yeah. So that's kind of where they're at right now.
And what they've done is they've moved everything later. So it's like you said, it's a dead period, but like the visits that people are coming on right now, like you'd have guys on commit watch because they'd already have visited. And so they would be coming in to be like, hey, they're going to come visit, and then Notre Dame's going to close the deal, whether it's at spring practice, whether it's the spring game, whatever it might be. You'd have guys who you feel good about. Notre Dame feels like they lead. They're going to come in. They're going to close. That'll be it, right? They don't have that at wide receiver right now. I'm looking at Caden Finley, who is the one who they need to close with. He's visited before. He's been to Notre Dame. But you have Bubba Frazier, you have Messiah Hampton, you have Mason James, you have Brian Williams. None of them have visited yet. So it's like they like Notre Dame, and Notre Dame could eventually close on them. But like that's going to be down the line. Like they still have to come have a good visit. Then you have to get them to come back to have another good visit, right? Where usually
it's
like
guys aren't committing on the first visit. Yeah.
Right. And so the reason, people say, well, how come, they aren't capitalizing on this run they just had? Because those relationships weren't built. You got to, like, if you have those guys on campus already and you just say, hey, we're going to be good. We're going to be good. We're going to be good. And then you go out and are good. Then you can say, see, I told you, like, we're going to be good. Let's close this up. Right now, it's like, hey, see, we were good. Come on campus and see what we're about. They already should have been on campus, right? That's the mistake that was made. Now everything gets pushed back, right? And so that's the situation at wide receiver. Now, let's see. It was Mike in Oklahoma says Notre Dame closes on Finley. All is good. And he's asking if that's correct. I think if they did close on Finley, I personally would be pretty excited about that. I think he's a really good football player.
He's good. He's good.
So,
very good
so on that front, just it's a player who's committed to your program, who is very good at the position he plays, right? So that's that. He's good. I think I kind of liken it to a football team that got off to a slow start in a football game, where like let's say against Stanford, right? Sometimes Notre Dame starts slow against Stanford. You get out of the first quarter and you're down 7-0, right? So probably, like, you could still say, all right, it's probably going to be okay, right? They're going to be fine, right? Notre Dame's better and Stanford isn't as good. They'll figure it out. But like, you do have to do the things to make sure that it's okay. Like, you do have to close on him, right? You can't just continue to say over and over again, well, if they close on X, we didn't close on X, but maybe we did close on Y now. Now we need to close on Y. We didn't close on Y. Now we need to close on Z. Like, at some point, you do, like, these things do have to start happening, right? Just because it's probably going to be okay doesn't mean that it will. And so we need to start seeing things. Like, well, they do got to make it happen.
Yeah, I think it's, well, the issue is not just like, hey, if they close on him, it's going to be good. Yeah, obviously it'll be good. Like, I don't think any of these guys, just be honest, like the guys that just like Connor Salmon and Trent Mosley, I think they're good players, good prospects, right? They're not like make or break guys in terms of talent. Like, they're not, you're not losing them and thinking like, oh man, this is a guy like who would have been just an absolute difference maker. This type of prospect is the guy that they needed more than anything. I don't think there's they could land guys that are equivalent or better than them still. So I don't think that's the issue. The issue is that if you're looking at where they're at, and like, I mean, they could have other visits set up with other guys that we don't know, but it's like they don't have these other like guys that you're like, okay, these guys are next. That is the main thing, right? Is that like, because you could say like if they don't land Finley, people will obviously freak out if they don't land Finley, but it's because they just don't have these other guys kind of stacked up next in terms of like, okay, well, these guys are this is the rest of the board. They have like 7 guys that they're there. And they're going to be fine. So it's like, if you look at, I mean, one thing I will say though, the whole USC's red hot on the recruiting trail. Relax.
We're monitoring. I mean, come see me in December.
Yes.
I tell people, how many times did Notre Dame lead the nation in recruiting? In
Notre Dame was number one. Had the number one recruiting class at this point last year.
2-3 years. This is a regular thing.
This is a Chad Bowden thing.
Yes.
He is very much early hype, and then he pushes
commitments.
And Peyton Bowen
he pushes commitments. Yes. We heard Peyton Bowen wanted to leave the class like a month after he committed. I mean, that was drama from start to finish. He was made to commit way before he was ready, and it led to what it led to.
I think there's just a lot of stuff too, like, and then they do this too, like he plans it out, which is smart. I think he's a very smart marketer, like in terms of like, hey, you're going to commit here at this time, and both you guys are commit on this day, and then you're going to commit the next day, and they set that up, right? It's all set up, so then it's like USC is red hot on the recruiting trail. Ooh, they're going to get the number one class, because what he wants is the other commits or whatever. He wants pressure. He wants pressure on the guys to be like, you better commit or you're not going to have a spot. And he also wants, hey, you better commit. Look at this, what they're building here.
The bandwagon effect.
It's a bandwagon thing, right? So that's his thing. And it works some of the time, right? I'm not going to say it doesn't work, because it works some of the time, but it also can backfire. And those guys, like you said, will bolt. And I just think it's a long way to go. I just looking at this, and I just saw like an on-3 graphic where it was like they have most number of blue chips. USC has the most with 9, A&M has 8, Oregon 7, Clemson 6. Notre Dame is tied with Miami, Florida State, Penn State, Auburn, and LSU with 5. So really, just looking at that kind of thing, you're like, maybe it's not much of a freak out. Also, did you know that they had literally 7 guys who were committed to them last year, who were in the top 150, who ended up decommitting from the class.
Yeah.
And there's no way they're going to sign all these guys who committed right now. There's no way. I know it's good that they're smarter, that they're getting some of these guys from California, but Oregon's not going to stop recruiting some of these guys. I'm not saying that Notre Dame is going to get the guys that they wanted from whatever, but when Oregon like beats this crap out of them on the field, which they will, that's going to be that isn't going to help things in terms of also too, like Oregon will just keep offering more money and this and that and whatever. Like they can kind of just keep going as much as they want with guys, which is why their recruiting has taken a huge uptick. So, which is also why like Miami can just all of a sudden get in if that they're interested in that. So there's a lot of people don't choose USC for the same reasons they choose Notre Dame or even Georgia or whatever. Like it's at least right now, right? if they're doing it, it's like I chose this because I want to be part of the number one class, and then all of a sudden guys are dropping off. It changes things. So I don't think that let's worry about them. Yeah, like you said, in December, and worry about at the same time too. You want to look at where Notre Dame is at in April. Like, where is like end of April? Where is Notre Dame at the end of April? Because if they go through the spring ball and they're like, I mean, that's momentum could flip, and that's where I think like things will change. I don't know if it's going to change at wide receiver, which is why I think that is concerning. But I think for a lot of the other positions, I do think like let's be honest. Okay, they want to get like an O tackle or two. They want to get a tight end, like they're going to get high quality dudes there. They're going to be fine. They're going to be fine there. Running back, they're going to be fine. Like I'm not worried about I think defensive line, like right now, because that's what the one thing people might be like, oh, what about the defensive line? They have way more guys who have taken multiple visits and are like Notre Dame is in the final group with.
Yeah.
So whether or not they close on these guys, we'll see. But Notre Dame is actual contenders for people, for these guys. They're going to get more linebacker. They're going to be fine at linebacker. They're going to be fine at corner. Like they'll get safeties. Like it's going to be fine with what it is because they have enough guys there. And you also feel good about them. Like I specifically, I think at like DB is an area where you can like pivot, and we've seen them pivot and get good players after. And I think edge too is another position where it's like there's so much development with guys that like are, if you look at like junior film, you're like, oh God, this guy's junior film is not pretty, not something that you would want, but like but you look at him and you're like, this guy is a freak athlete though, and he's long and he's all this, and then all of a sudden it's just like it clicks for him.
Yeah,
there's so much of that, so it's like I don't think you're worried about that kind of thing. It's just, but if you're looking at just receiver, it's just the truth. It's like, I mean, they get Finley, they get Braden Robinson, who obviously visited whatever, right? Like, and that's a guy they like, but I mean, you're battling a lot of tough schools for these guys. So it's like, if you get it, then it's fine. Yes. But if you don't get it, it could be potential disaster.
Yeah.
And that was the thing last year. Afterward, it's like, okay, well, like, let's wait, let's chill and whatever. Well, they didn't finish how people wanted them to. So that put more pressure on this year. And it just hasn't materialized.
Yeah. And I think too, we are so used to we're so used to the cadence of how recruiting used to go the last 2-3 years, because Chad would never let this conversation be happening, because he's always pushing for, when I say he would never let it be happening, is like he would always make sure like the juice was always running.
He cares about the PR aspect.
Yeah, of it. like it was always, like Ivan Taylor and Deuce Knight, both in Notre Dame's class at this time last year. Neither ended up in the class. Deuce Knight didn't even end up at the school that he was rumored to go to. Ivan Taylor committed to Michigan, and then he committed to Alabama. Like he didn't even end up, like Notre Dame wasn't even like second place for that situation, right? Like there was a third team involved when it came to that. Like we have Peyton Bowen. You have those types of stuff. Like Derek Meadows was basically like, the word was he's as much as Notre Dame's class as you can be. Dylan Robinson, same thing. The wide receiver who ended up going to Washington, I think, where it's like, did he end up at Washington? I
think.
I'm pretty sure. Yeah, it's like that.
And he's going to play corner.
That's funny. That situation was like, that's a lock. Derek Meadows is a lock. Like, where are people getting that from? You know what I mean? Like, it just becomes kind of the canon of it. Oh, like everything's going so great, and then you get to the fall, and it's like, oh man, it's not going so great. You know, like we had that same conversation, right? But because it was like the wheels fell off, like reality kind of caught up, right? So John Imperial asks, how does Notre Dame fix this? More prolific passing product on the field. So he's talking about wide receiver now. My question to you, Jamie, is how much does Notre Dame need to fix this? In terms of, is it that important to their program specifically that they are a recruit? Like, look, obviously you try to land the best wide receivers you can, right? Of course, right? The best players you can always, right? But like, if you gotta choose, you'd rather have those linemen. You'd rather have those running backs. That's the heartbeat of what the Notre Dame football program is. And it probably needs to be that way forever. That's just what the program is, you know? So I just feel like Notre Dame needs to do well at wide receiver. They need to do great on the offensive line. They need to do great at the D line. And like you said about edges a second ago, like there's a difference between the perception of Notre Dame's edge recruiting and Notre Dame's edge situation, where their edge situation is very good, in my opinion, very good. Their edge recruiting at the time when these things get, discussed, it's like, man, what are we doing at Viper? What's Notre Dame doing at Viper? Like, what are their edge rushers? Like, Notre Dame needs to get those edge rushers. Meanwhile, how many Vipers does Notre Dame? Junior Tulihalamaka couldn't play at edge prior to Patelho and Traore getting hurt. And now he's second on the team in total pressures because he has stepped in and did a great job, right? He's their third team Viper. Like their edge situation does not meet does not match up with the perception of what their recruiting is. You know what I mean? So how important is it that Notre Dame like really excels at wide receiver? Obviously they need good ones. Don't get me wrong. They need good wide receivers, but like, it's not what the heartbeat of that program is either.
Yeah, I think it's important. Obviously you need,
right. I don't want to.
Yeah. I know you're not saying that like, hey, get a bunch of,
it doesn't matter, right? Like it matters. It does.
You need good blockers. No, it's not. That's not what Greg's saying at all. Just with Sly Fox though. Wide receivers, you can say, hey, divas, whatever, because there is a certain thing of like you see guys in the pros and like what like give me the ball and all this kind of stuff.
Chase Claypool was a diva.
Yeah.
Take that again. Like Kevin Stepherson. Diva, let's go.
D-line divas. You never been in a D-line room, man. It's not whatever. They want money. They're getting offered the money because D-line is that important. That's it's the hardest thing for these guys to get. And there's so many, like, that's ultimately people think like offensive, defensive line, like offensive tackles, defensive tackles, like they're hard to find, really, really good ones. So it's like, that's kind of like part of what goes with it. Like, you're not going to blame anyone to be like, hey, well, this team's going to offer you $500,000. And, we're like, well, we're not paying you. What? Like, someone's going to take it, right? That's not what it's saying. They want to be paid. Everyone wants to be paid. Everyone wants to be paid, man. They're just getting, they're taking what's offered to them. It's just like, and some of these, there's a difference between some guys wanting to, like looking for it and being like, hey, I want this. Obviously, whatever. We don't need to get into it, but there's a receiver who was like, hey, make sure that my name is this and that and blah, blah, blah. I can tell you the D-line guys aren't telling you, hey, make sure get my ranking here. And I did this, whatever. That's not happening with stories. They're not asking that of reporters. That's not diva behavior. So it's, grammar. It's you can't use it in the same. They're not the same thing. It's important for them to. It is very important for them to get quality receivers, right? It is very important for them to get quality receivers. 5 stars and all that, like it is would be great, obviously, but I think you can see from just Notre Dame, their highest ranked receivers over, X number of years, a lot of those guys haven't been the best guys, haven't developed into the best guys.
Yeah.
And I don't even think that's just a Notre Dame thing. That is like, can be in a lot of places, because there's so much more that goes into being like a great receiver than just having like, this guy's got track speed, this guy's got this guy's got that. That person has to be developed. They have to certainly, like, what were people talking about, the offense and like the role of the offense and what you're doing. The quarterback is going to make a difference, right? Like, that is going to be like last year, or 2021, another example. Can you protect long enough to throw the ball deep? Can you do all of these things? All of these kind of things matter. The style of offense. Obviously, guys are going to put up numbers in a you mentioned Josh Kelly, who went to Texas Tech. One of the reasons he went to Texas Tech is because it was an air raid. So he's going to get numbers there, right? So you're going to realize that some offenses are different. And obviously, if everyone could recruit the way that Ohio State recruits at receiver, they would. You absolutely would just want that all the time. But even if you look at like Ohio State, I mean, they've had a ton of talent over the years, but they kind of went to a different level after, like, Hartline is what kind of taken them to a level. Just like Mike Mickens took Notre Dame at a different level at corner. And then all of a sudden too, even when guys that are like, maybe they're not the highest rank, people look at them and they're like, I mean, there's a trust that's built there about what Mickens has done. And, Mike Brown, he has a track record of developing guys, but that hasn't happened at Notre Dame yet. And they haven't put the numbers last year, obviously, part of the myriad reasons why they didn't have big numbers. So it would help if Jane Greathouse has a monster season and he looks like, whoa, could he leave after this year and go to the league? Like, that would be huge for Notre Dame. That would that probably would be good if he did leave, but it would be good for like the perception of Notre Dame recruiting. If
Gilbert blew up.
Micah Gilbert blew up. This spring, there's going to be Micah Gilbert, Cam Williams, Logan Saldate, Elijah Burris, Jerome Bettis Jr., and Tavis Richardson. They're all on campus. First and second year receivers. If those guys, if you come out of spring and you're like, certified dude, Micah Gilbert, or Cam Williams, that he was raw before, but wow, he really took a massive jump. Like, Cam Williams is going to be a problem this year, or any of these guys, or all of a sudden, Antavius Richardson, probably not going to be someone. I mean, I wouldn't predict that he's going to be someone that is like lighting it up in his first spring as he's adjusting to like being a receiver for the first time and all of these things there. Cause there's obviously some development that has to go on there. But if him or one of the other guys of like Burris, I mean, would probably be the most likely. But if one of those guys all of a sudden looks like that and becomes this type of player that you think like, oh wow, I think they got the rankings wrong on them, like Leonard Moore, right? Like Ben Morrison. It changes things, and it changes how Mike Brown is viewed. It changes what the situation, like you said, the situation of like how you're looking at the edge situation. It changes all of these things where you're like, when you shouldn't be just recruiting off of like, hey, here's the rankings list and this is whatever. I know, and it doesn't happen for teams. That's not what they do, but it should get to a point where right now, if you work for Rivals, you work for 24/7, you work for On3, whatever. If Mike Mickens offers a corner, you should probably be like, hey, I think we might have this guy too low. Like, we need to look at this guy again, like, and reevaluate. Like, but that took time. That took time for him to do that, even though he probably should have had that before. But it's like all these things, when you look at like where Notre Dame is at, like, they just haven't had the guys like the Lorenzo Styles Juniors, the Jordan Johnson, the Kevin Austin Jr.
Tobias
Merriweather.
Braylon
These
James.
guys, like, yes, Braylon James, like,
these
are
highly
guys,
rated recruits.
highly rated guys. The closest one to hitting Kevin Austin took him 4 years. Obviously, there was off the field stuff that led to it, but it's just one of those things where it's like, you have to hit on those guys. It's like, hey, it looks great that you got them. Who cares if they didn't end up being good? If they didn't end up living up to it, right? Like, it doesn't really matter. So it's kind of about finding the right guy. So who cares if they sign like a 5-star guy? Like, will anyone actually care if Micah Gilbert ends up being just a stud? Will people care that he was ranked lower than Cam Williams? No. They won't care. They won't care if Gilbert and Saldate end up being like an unbelievable 1-2 punch in 2026. No one will care about Cam Williams. And I'm not saying this to shade him. I'm just saying, like, that's just a reality.
It's just a fact. Yeah.
It's just a fact. Micah Bell was had a much better rating than Leonard Moore, right? Like, it just doesn't matter, right? Like, so that's what you need to do more than anything.
Yeah.
So that's what needs to kind of pay off for Notre Dame, is get these guys that you think, because one thing you could say about Jane Greathouse, obviously he came from like a very prolific program, put up big time numbers, all this kind of stuff. But he had like an incredible work ethic. And you're like, there's just no way this guy's at his floor is solid player. And obviously you're seeing him be more than that. And he can be more than that. But you need to get guys that, like, are of that similar ilk. It doesn't have to be that same kind of thing, but who want to do those kind of things that you can turn into that. They have to want to do that, just like they have to want to do it at like DB and linebacker and all those guys like want to be great and they want to do this and they want to like do it at Notre Dame, right? So I think all that kind of stuff like is like doesn't really get taken into the equation enough. Of like, I would love if, don't get me wrong, if Notre Dame had Cam Coleman on their team, yes, please, that would be great. But until they get to a point where, I don't even know if they'll ever get to a point where they're ever going to get a Cam Coleman, which kind of goes back to what you said. They don't maybe need to land a Cam Coleman because they're probably never going to do that, know? But it's about like getting the guys when they're at Notre Dame and turning them into pros and developing them in that way and getting the guys that have like the traits that you want and then developing them into that. Because when you start doing that, also recruiting becomes easier. And that's really kind of like what it is. And it's hard to build on. It's like kind of like how Notre Dame's like O-line U and tight end. It's like one reason you should never worry about those positions is because people would be stupid not to choose Notre Dame at those positions. Cause like, I understand you could go and have success somewhere else, but you can't deny of like what Notre Dame's track record has been, no matter who the coach was, and at those positions and the way they've developed those positions.
Yeah. All right. I think we can end it there. We are going to, this channel is going to press on though. I'm going to just hop on in a second with Dara for Dimes with Dara. That's coming up pretty much in like 5 minutes. I'm going to click off this. We're going to go over there. So click on over to the show for Dimes with Dara. We're going to talk about the women's basketball team. Not more tough conversations to be had about Notre Dame sports. We're going to talk about them. We're going to talk about the tournament run. She's going to talk to us about their struggles, what it is like to struggle on a team that's playing great and then all of a sudden can't really find itself. So we're going to talk about that. So click over. It's in your YouTube feed. The link is right there on your YouTube. Check it out. I'm going to click over there. For Jamie and I, we'll talk to you next week. We'll be back on Monday. Power Hour. We'll be back on Tuesday for Hit and Hustle as well. So we'll see you on Dimes with Dara. We'll talk to you soon. Keep hitting and hustling.